Hey Garnet, how are you?
Pretty good, thanks, Adnan. How are you?
Oh, just fine. Well, welcome to this Ozark Mountain Publishing author series, and I'm glad we were able to get together today. This is basically a process to just go and talk to our authors and talk to them about their past, about how they got to be authors and the books they've written. I figured if we could start out with you and how things started out, we'll go from there, and we'll get into your books later on.
Okay, well, um, I was before I became an author, I was a lawyer, a corporate lawyer, and I practiced law for about 34 years. How I got into the book writing game was when I met my spirit guide Albert, and how that came about was I was still practicing law and I was walking down the street one sunny afternoon, and a homeless man just jumped out in front of me. He stopped me in my tracks, and he looked like a typical homeless man with long, stringy hair and scraggly beard and dirty, slept-in clothes. But I didn't go around him because he had these amazing, dazzling, sparkling blue eyes, and his eyes were they seemed to be doing two things. First of all, he seemed to be looking right down deep within me, right down to the depths of my soul, and I felt that he knew everything about me, everything I've ever said or done in my life, which was unusual because we'd never met before. But I didn't feel violated because at the same time, his gaze was sending me this wave of pure, unconditional love that infused my whole body with an amazing sense of peace and security and well-being. So I stood there like a deer caught in the headlights, just basking in the glow from this man's gaze. And I'm not sure how long. It was like a time warp. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, he broke the spell by saying to me, "Why are you here?" And then he promptly disappeared into a nearby store. So when I finally collected my wits, I went into the store to find him. I had to find out who he was and why did he stop me and how did he have these amazing eyes. So I went into the store. There was only one entrance and exit, same doorway, but he wasn't anywhere in the store. So I walked back out on the street for up and down for several blocks trying to find him, but he had disappeared into thin air. So I walked back to my office slowly, and that night I resolved I had to go back the next day to see if I could find him. So I did. Next day, same time of day, same street, and I walked around trying to find him. I did this for about 20 minutes. I was about to give up when I finally spotted him sitting all alone on a bench. So I went up to him and I said, "Who are you and why did you stop me the other day?" And he said, "I'm a soul just like you. I'm here to help you on your journey and answer your questions." So then my skeptical lawyer brain kicked in, and I said to him, "Why do you think you can help me when you can't even help yourself? Because it looks like you've been sleeping on the street for weeks and you smell like a dead fish." Well, that didn't faze him at all. He just cracked a big smile and he said, "Looks can be deceiving because you look like you're a successful corporate lawyer with everything under control, but we both know that's just a facade." He said, "You've been seeking answers, the eternal questions of life for these many years, like who are you? Why are you here? What's your life purpose? And what happens to you when you die?" And we know that you have not found those answers yet. So he said, "If you want to, turn around and go back to your office and see if you can find those answers on all those emails that are waiting for you on your computer, or you can sit down and have a chat with me." So luckily, my intuition was screaming at me that I needed to sit down and talk to this guy. So I did. Sat down on the bench beside him, and he told me that his name was Albert, and he was actually one of my spirit guides in disguise. So that was the beginning of a dialogue that went off and on for the next several months between Albert and me. And I asked him all the eternal questions of life. He gave me answers. We went back and forth with questions and answers over a period of time. I found out that I was the only one who could see him as the homeless man. I could see him, I could touch him. But he said if anybody had been walking by the bench that day, they wouldn't have seen him. They would have seen me sitting on the bench talking to myself because they couldn't see Albert. And after the first three occasions, he didn't manifest in physical form. He was just a voice in my head, and we communicated by telepathy. So most of the conversation was by telepathy. And when I asked him, "Why did you show up in my life as the homeless man? Why did you manifest as the homeless man initially?" And he said, Well, if he had just started talking to me as a voice in my head out of the blue, I probably would have thought I was losing my mind. So that was his way of easing me into the conversation, and so it worked. So during the early part of our dialogue, he then surprised me by saying, "I'm not just here to satisfy your curiosity. I'm here to um, get you to reveal what I tell you to everyone else in the world, and I want you to write books about what I reveal to you," which was quite a surprise to me because I had never even dreamed of writing a book. So anyway, after about a year after I met Albert, I retired from the law because it didn't seem to be very relevant anymore. And so then I slowly got around to writing the manuscript for my first book, Dancing on a Stamp. And it took me quite a while, and I was really slow going. And after I'd finished the manuscript, I thought, should I throw this in a drawer, never to be seen again, or should I find a publisher? So, and I knew that what I wrote in my first book was totally out of character in terms of what my former law partners and clients and other colleagues, how they knew me, because I was very much of a straight-laced corporate lawyer. I didn't talk about religion, spirituality, or anything like that. So this would have been very strange to them. And I was afraid I would lose some friends, that they would shun me, think maybe I'd gone senile early in my life. So I struggled with that a bit. And then finally I decided I had to get it published, let the chips fall where they may. And so then I sought out a publisher, which ended up being Ozark Mountain Publishing. So then when it was published, my prediction was true, that some of my former friends and colleagues shunned me. They didn't really talk to me. They didn't say to my face that they thought I was crazy, but I knew they were thinking that. And so, but in any event, so I lost a few friends, gained a whole lot, many more new friends who were spiritually enlightened. And so it's been really a very amazing process. So that was my first book, Dancing on a Stamp. And then after I finished that one, and the first book was published, Albert came into my life in a very different way. I was sound asleep in my bed one night, and I woke up and I could see this ghost-like figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom. Well, when it got closer, I could see that it was Albert, but he was in astral form. And so I said, "Hi, Albert, what brings you here? What's going on?" He said, "I've come to take you on a series of astral trips, out-of-body adventures. I'm going to take you to the spirit side, other places on your planet, other places in the universe, because I want you to write about what you see and hear in your next books. And by the way, you're not finished with one, you're going to write 3 or 4 more." So that also surprised me, but I had learned by now not to argue with Albert, because he would always win eventually. And so then he reached out and literally pulled my astral body out of my physical body. And he said, "Come on, follow me." We rose up through the ceiling and up to a place high above our planet. And when you're traveling on the astral plane, of course, you're at a very high vibration level, and you can pass through walls and ceilings and other things in the physical realm like they weren't there. So anyway, rise up through the ceiling. He let me stop high above our planet, and I turned around to look at our beautiful planet, which was just an amazing, breathtaking scene from that vantage point. Our planet was like a little blue pendant hanging in the inky blackness of space. It was really quite an amazing scene. And so then the first stop that he took me to on my first trip was to the spirit side. We ended up going through a doorway and sort of touching down in a beautiful meadow. It was like incredibly beautiful, lush green grass, wildflowers in 1,000 different colors, majestic trees. It was just like, you can imagine the most beautiful park or meadow in the world that you may have seen, and multiply it by 1,000 times, and that's getting close to what this meadow was like. So then I followed him. We followed a path up to the top of the small hill, and at the top of the hill, I could see a group of people waiting for me at the bottom on the other side. So as we got closer, my heart skipped a beat, because I could recognize who they were. And these souls were my mother, father, and brother, and grandparents, and various aunts and uncles who had already passed away. They were there to welcome me. So they wrapped me in their arms in warm hugs, and gave me nothing but unconditional love. And Albert said to me, "This is a preview of the welcoming party that I will have when I finally cross over after my body dies. They will be there to welcome me, just like everyone else when they cross over will have a welcoming party. And the amazing thing about this group was not just the humans that were there, but my little dog Oscar, who had passed away a few years before. He was there. He comes running out from behind them, his little tail wagging his whole body, and he came to greet me. And it was such a amazingly warm scene. And that's also the message they wanted to give to everyone, is that if you have a beloved pet, cat, dog, lizard, rabbit, whatever, they will be there to greet you when you cross over to the spirit side yourself. And so it was really nice to know that. It also reaffirmed what Albert had told me during our conversation, that everyone, when humans die, their souls cross over to the spirit side. Everyone goes back there. And so it was really nice to see that, sort of like in real life, to see my deceased relatives who were there. And then, so anyway, that was the beginning of my astral trips. And that led to my last 4 books. The first book was Dancing on a Stamp, which was my dialogue with Albert. And then the next 4 books, Dancing Forever with Spirit, Dance of Heavenly Bliss, Dance of Eternal Rapture, and Dancing with Angels in Heaven, all detail various astral trips I had with Albert and various people I met, not just on the spirit side, but on other planets. So it was a very fascinating group of tours with Albert as my tour guide. And I never knew when Albert was going to show up in my room. It was always the same way. He'd just show up unannounced in my bedroom and take me away on an astral trip. I never knew in advance when he was coming, and he never told me where we're going. It was a bit of a surprise, but he always had an agenda. He wanted me to meet certain people and see certain things so that I could write about them in my books. So that was sort of the initial encounters with Albert, and it's been a very fascinating journey. Most of the trips are detailed to some degree in my books, but I haven't written all of them down. At some point, I'll maybe do another book, but right now I've just finished the 5th book, and I'm just waiting for marching orders from Albert.
So, Garnet, do you want to start out with your latest book and what it is that you covered, and then we'll go into some other
Sure.
happenings there?
Yeah. Well, the first part of my 5th book is that I got to attend an orientation session on the spirit side, and this was basically an orientation for new souls who have never before incarnated on Earth. And so it was just sort of like, as you can imagine, the people who were doing this was Albert and the chair of the Council of Wise Ones, Sophia, and they were just giving a prep to the souls who were thinking of incarnating on Earth, and it was very, very good, because it sort of brought everything all together from all my other trips. It all brought together in one nice encapsulated form, because I got to sit and listen to what they were telling these new souls, and Earth is a very difficult school, as you know, and so some souls who were thinking of coming to Earth, really needed to know the extent of what would happen or might happen when they incarnated on planet Earth. So it was really a good class for me to listen in on. And so they basically went over the sort of right from the beginning, and they explained how the universe was created. So it was the source. Some people refer to the source as God. I call it the source. The source created the universe. Initially, it was just a singularity of energy. Then the source decided to expand, and by doing that created a bunch of matter and energy that fanned out and formed gases, and eventually formed stars and planets and galaxies. So the source created all that, and then the interesting thing about the creation of the universe is that the source programmed the universe to divide at random times, so that the first universe split into 2, just like a human cell will divide into 2 in a process called mitosis. So the first one split into 2, and then at random times those universes also split into 2, and this has been going on for a long time. So we have a number of parallel universes that exist, and planet Earth exists in some of those parallel universes, and I'll tell you about some of those later. But anyway, it was a good sort of prep, for a reminder for everyone to know sort of how this all came about. And in this class, one of the interesting things was we had a few, I guess you'd call guest speakers. One of them was Gaia, the consciousness of our planet, and Gaia's message to the souls there, and her message had been to me before to give to humanity, is that she was really quite upset with what humans on Earth were doing in terms of polluting, her rivers and lakes and her atmosphere and her soil, and this pollution was really getting out of hand. And Gaia really wanted to let everyone know that humans really had to change their way, or it could end up badly. And what she said was that humans may have noticed that there's been an increase in the number and intensity of natural disasters on our planet over the last 5-10 years. And if you watch the news, you can tell. I mean, there's been wildfires everywhere, floods, heat waves, earthquakes, tornadoes. I mean, this has really increased, and that's just because of the climate change that our pollution is engendering. And so her words of advice to humans is that we better change our way, or it could end up very much of a big disaster. So that was Gaia. So they went over a number of things in this orientation class. I won't go into all of it, but they basically explain sort of how the cycle of reincarnation works on Earth, which is basically that all souls, their true home is the spirit side, a very high vibration place, like really high vibration, way higher than planet Earth. That's our true home, where we are beings of energy. And why we come here is that we chose voluntarily to come here on our own, in order to experience certain challenges and learn certain lessons. And that's all part of our growth and evolution as a soul. And so and the answer to the question is, why am I here? Who put me here? The answer is, you put yourself here. Everyone chose to come here. And we don't remember that, but clearly it was our choice before we incarnated to come here. And before we incarnate, we all prepare a life plan, which just sets out the major significant aspects of our new lives that we're hoping to live on planet Earth. And so in our life plans, we'll pick out our name, the place we're going to be born, the first language we will learn, and the identity of our parents and siblings and cousins and other relatives. And we do that very specifically because we are trying to experience certain things in our incarnation. The trouble is that we don't remember once we're born. We don't remember that we have a life plan. So we're kind of floundering around a bit blindly, trying to make our way through life on Earth without really knowing what we should be doing. But we did have a plan beforehand, and how we get to know a bit more about what was in our plan is that we have spirit guides. And we all have 2 or 3 or more spirit guides who are like our life coaches, who reside on the spirit realm, and they're there to coach us as we go through our life. And so, every time we come to a fork in the road and we have to decide, should I take the left fork or the right fork, our spirit guides will be sending us messages telling us which one is the appropriate path based upon what we had tried to accomplish or hope to accomplish in our life plan. The trouble with that is that most people don't hear these messages because they're very subtle. They're like flashes of intuition, whispers in our mind, gut feelings, coincidental events, and all too often people don't hear the messages or don't recognize where they come from or don't bother to act on them. And so it's a bit of a challenge. It's one of the reasons that the Earth School is so tough, is because we don't hear these messages very clearly usually, and we don't know what's in our life plan. But it doesn't really matter, because as we go through life, if we go off course, it doesn't really matter. We have other opportunities to get back on course. But at the end of the day, when our physical body dies and we go back to the spirit side, if we haven't ticked all the boxes off in our life plan, we can come back again and again and again. So there's a limitless number of lives that we can choose in terms of our incarnation. But one of the interesting things that they said in this orientation class, which of course Albert had already told me, is that contrary to what a lot of religions on Earth preach, the source of the God does not manipulate events on Earth and does not make rules for us to follow. So if you're like a Christian, I was raised as a Roman Catholic, if you're like a Christian, of course, the church tells you that there's all kinds of rules that God has promulgated that we need to follow. And if we don't follow those rules, we could end up in an awful place called hell forever. But Albert says, and this was told to the souls in the orientation class, he said, no, the source doesn't make rules. And then it follows that when we die, there's no judgment in the afterlife. There's no judgment by source, no judgment by anyone, and there's no punishment. And that means, of course, that hell doesn't exist. And the existence of hell has been a major tenet of a lot of major religions for ages. And it's a threat that they use to scare people into following the rules of the church and coming to church every Sunday and doing those things that all good members of each religion should do. But it's just a fiction. It doesn't really exist because everyone goes back to the spirit side no matter what they did on earth. Okay, so that's really sort of the major part of the cycle reincarnation. The other major part is that when you get back to the spirit side, one of the first things you do is have a life review. So the life review is basically where you go over the life you just finished in very intimate detail, and you can look at it any way. It's like watching a 3D movie, and you can see everything you did in your life, because we don't remember everything we've done so far in our current lives. We remember some of the highlights, but when you get the life review, you get to see everything. And the interesting thing about a life review is that you not only get to see what you said and did and what others said and did around you, you get to hear the thoughts and feel the emotions of the people you interacted with. So, for example, if you said something nasty to a neighbor or someone at work, you would get to feel their hurt and anguish over your cruel words. But it also works for good things. So if you helped a senior citizen carry her grocery bags across a busy crosswalk one day, you'd get to feel her thoughts where she was very grateful and sent you lots of love. And so you get the good and the bad, and it's very much of a learning tool, because it's not meant to make you feel guilty. It's meant to help you learn the things that you could have done differently from that perspective. And then for the next life, should you choose to do that, you get to use that experience to plan your next life and perhaps try to do something different or do things better. And so, and then once your life review is finished, you can then decide, what do I do? You can decide to go back and reincarnate as a human on Earth, or you can decide to incarnate as a life form on another planet, or you can just stay on the spirit side. So it's absolutely everyone's choice. No one makes you come back. No one tells you what you have to do when you come back. So it's all very much a free choice. And so some souls will incarnate 5 times and then say, that's it for planet Earth. Others will incarnate, several hundred times. It's entirely up to each soul. So that's really sort of the groundwork, as it was explained in this class for the new souls. That's what happens on planet Earth, and this is what you can expect. And so it was really, quite amazing for me to sit in this session and understand what these new souls were being taught, and in this orientation class, so they knew what to expect if they decided to incarnate on planet Earth. So that was the first part of my 5th book. Excuse me. And then I got to meet a few very interesting souls on the spirit side. In my other books, I've had occasion to meet lots of different interesting souls, like Jesus Christ and his mother Mary and Mary Magdalene and Moses and Muhammad and Buddha. And if we have time, I can go into those events later in the interview. But the ones that I met that are detailed in my 5th book were quite interesting. One of them was Albert Einstein, who I always admired as being one of the great brains of the 20th century. And he developed the theories of relativity, the general and the special ones, early in the 1900s, and he was way ahead of his time, because a lot of people scoffed at him and did not really believe that this made any sense. But he was the one who took what had been before the basics of Newtonian physics and took it up a notch into his relativity theory. And he was the one who came up with the equation E equals mc squared, which is energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. And he's also the one who said that the physical barrier to speed in our universe was the speed of light. So he was quite famous. And when I talked to him on this, and one of the things he tried to accomplish when he was living on Earth was to develop a unified field theory for all the forces in nature. And there's essentially four forces in nature. There's gravity, electromagnetism, strong nuclear, and weak nuclear. He was trying to find some way of unifying these all into one sort of theory, but he didn't make it, not while he's living on Earth. And when I talked to him after he had, he had obviously passed away, so he was in the spirit side. And I said, "Did you ever figure out how to unify all these forces?" He said, "Oh yeah." He said it was easy. Once I got back here, I could easily understand what I was missing, and I know now how they all fit together. So he's quite happy about that. He also admitted that his theory about not being able to exceed the speed of light, he has since discovered that after passing over to the spirit side, that there's lots of ET races that have developed warp drives that effectively can allow them to traverse from one star system to another in a speed much faster than the speed of light. And he said how this developed was that they had discovered that there's a number of natural wormholes in the universe. And if you go into one of these natural wormholes, it basically warps the space-time continuum to allow people to traverse great distances in a very short period of time. So what happened was the advanced ET races, and there's many of them, not just one, they learned how to create an artificial wormhole around their ship to allow them to traverse, across star systems, across galaxies in a very short period of time. So he said, in the absence of the wormhole, the speed of light is the physical barrier, but because of these wormholes, which creates a warp in space, that the speed of light effectively can be exceeded. And so he was quite happy to learn that. And he said someday humans on Earth will develop a warp drive. We're not there yet, but someday we will. So it's really quite an interesting conversation. And then I had another one, which is sort of quite different. This one was with Marie Antoinette. As you know, Marie Antoinette was the Queen of France just before the French Revolution. She was married to King Louis XVI. And so she had an interesting tale. She was the daughter of Empress Maria, who's the empress of the Habsburg Empire. And so her mother hooked her up with the heir apparent to the King of France. She was married when she was 14. He was 15, which is quite young by our standards. And so she met her husband for the first time probably about a week before they were married. And the interesting thing was that it took a long time for them to, I won't go into details, but one of the things was that it took a long time for them to apparently consummate their marriage. But it turned out that there was a reason for that, which I won't disclose. It's in my 5th book if people are interested. But one of the things that I said to her was, and of course, when the French Revolution started, I asked her if she was aware of the problems in the country, and she said yes, she was sort of, but didn't think it was hers to fix. So then history says that she has been attributed with the saying that when she was told the peasants didn't have any bread to eat, that she said, "Let them eat cake." Well, I asked her if she said that. She said, no, it wasn't true. She never said that. That was just somebody just put those words into her mouth. And she said she was arrogant, but not quite that arrogant. So then she told me an interesting story. And I said, when the revolution sort of took over the country of France, they started executing a lot of the royals with the guillotine, which is basically a big blade that drops down and chops off their head. And so her husband was, who was then King Louis XVI, her husband was executed first, and then she was tried in a bit of a kangaroo court. She said that she thought that the judges had already made up their mind, and she was charged with conviction of treason. So she was sentenced to death as well. So I said to her, well, it must have been awful when they were leading you towards this guillotine that you knew that you were going to lose your head. And she said, yes. She said, but the good thing was a couple of days before her execution date, she was greeted in her cell by 2 of her spirit guides. And her spirit guides appeared to her. No one else could see her, or see them rather. They appeared to her and they reassured her that she was going to, when she was, her human body was dead, she was going to return to the spirit side. They would be there with her to guide her back. She should not worry about it. So then when she was led out of her cell towards the the platform where the guillotine was, they were there with her, although no one else could see them, and that gave her a lot of comfort. And so she said she was led to the guillotine. She knelt down on a padded bench in front of the blade, put her neck into the appropriate slot, and then she actually left her body just before the blade struck her neck. And so she was hovering above her body, and she looked to see that her head had fallen off the platform, rolled off the platform, and into the gutter. And that was the last thing she saw of her body. But she said that the fact that her guides appeared to her provided her with great comfort, and it made it this horrific event of having her head chopped off much more less anxiety causing and fearful, and not as fearful without her guides being there, but they were there to comfort her. So interesting story about her. Then the other one interesting story I met, and which I describe in book 5, was I met with Mother Teresa. And of course, most people know Mother Teresa was a very famous Roman Catholic nun in India who did a lot of good things. She was actually canonized by the Pope, and she's known as Saint Teresa. So I asked her about her life on Earth. She said, well, she did a lot of good things, but a lot of it was sort of overblown. She said that, she wasn't perfect, but she tried to do her best. And she said that she was canonized as a saint because there was a lot of pressure from Catholics and the press and so on to make her a saint. And so that happened, but she sort of scoffed at the idea of somebody becoming a saint. She said that everyone tries to do their best, and she was very humble. She didn't think that she was all that special. But she did say that when she crossed over to the spirit side, one of the things that she found very useful was her life review. And I mentioned that before about a life review. Well, she had hers, and she said it's a very great learning tool. She was happy to do it, and she could see that yes, she did do some good things, but there's a few things that she didn't do, and she sort of said, she didn't think that she was really a saint, and she just thought it was a funny designation. So interesting coming from Mother Teresa. So those were 3 interesting people I met that I described in book 5. But I'm just trying to think of the next one I should tell you about in book 5. In some of my earlier books, I had encountered a number of ETs and a number of extraterrestrials living on different planets. A lot of them are, very advanced, and they can travel faster than speed of light. They have warp drive. They have very advanced technology, and they have been monitoring Earth for a long, long time. And their craft are what people refer to as UFOs or UAPs. Sometimes they are made visible to humans. A lot of times they aren't. And they're very benevolent. They're here to help us with our civilization. And so they send us very subtle messages, inspiration for new inventions and so on, but they aren't allowed to directly interfere in any big way with what goes on our planet. So we've had many wars over the ages. We have weapons of mass destruction, and they have the technology that they could have stopped all that. They could destroy all of our weapons, but they aren't allowed to do so because they belong to this galactic federation, which is a federation of all the super intelligent advanced races in our galaxy. And the Galactic Federation has a directive called, it's like the Prime Directive on Star Trek. If anybody's watched Star Trek, they know that the Prime Directive there said that advanced civilizations aren't allowed to unduly interfere with the development of an inferior race. So they're bound by that, and to them, we're an inferior race because we don't have the same technology. So they can't just go in and solve our problems and give us a silver bullet to get rid of all the weapons and everything else that plagues our society. So they have to just help us in subtle ways. So there are lots of ET races around. Now, in my 5th book, I got to meet a new kind. It was a astral trip to a different planet, far away. And there I met with a very intelligent creature that dominated a race that dominated that planet. And this creature looked very much like an alligator. It was a reptilian. It turned out that the soul who was occupying this particular creature had incarnated on Earth several times before and knew Albert, and so knew the history of planet Earth. The interesting thing about this group was that they had developed a technique where they could get all the sustenance that they needed for their, all the nutrition to sustain their bodies from their sun. And they had discovered a process like photosynthesis, except that it allowed those creatures to take sunlight and convert it into nutrition that they could use in their bodies. So they didn't need to eat any food. They didn't kill any animals. Didn't even need to eat any plants because they got all their energy from the sun. So it was a very peaceful kind of civilization. It was a great way to find sustenance for their bodies, and so it was one of those things that you could hope that people on planet Earth could one day develop, but we're just not there yet. And so the good thing was that, of course, if you develop this, you don't have to kill other animals, so you just take your energy from the sun. So that was a very interesting encounter. I also got to see what went on in Area 51. Of course, a lot of people are familiar with Area 51. It's this secret base that the U.S. government has in Nevada. Very secret. Nobody can get in there. And a lot of people speculate that there's UFO crafts and alien bodies and so on there. So I asked Albert to take me there. So he did. Of course, we're traveling astrally, so we can go through concrete walls and so on, and no one can see us. And so there, what I saw was the little scout craft that had crashed in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. So it was still there. And after it had crashed in Roswell, it was taken by the Army to the Roswell Army Air Base, and then from there to Andrews Air Force Base, and then eventually to Area 51. So it was still there. And it was very interesting because it was made out of some metallic alloy that was virtually indestructible. And so the engineers and the scientists in the U.S. government had been trying to figure out how to replicate this particular material, but they hadn't been able to do so. And in the cockpit, they haven't been able to figure out what propelled this craft or how it was navigated. The avionics, they could not figure it out. So it was just there. One day they may be able to figure it out, but they haven't been able to do that yet. And then he showed me basically a big tank full of preservative liquid, and there were floating two little alien bodies. And these were the guys who had piloted this craft, and they were their bodies had been preserved. They had died in the crash. One of them was still alive after the crash, and the surgeons and the doctors had tried to save this little guy, but they couldn't, and he eventually died and then was dissected. So the two intact bodies were floating in this preservative, and the third body had been dissected. The bodies were not too dissimilar from human bodies, similar organs, but they were clearly alien life forms. So that was very interesting. And so a lot of people have speculated that there's something like that in Area 51, and I saw as a fact that that's what was there. Now I should pause, and then if you want to ask a question, but I can carry on if you want.
No, please do. You're in a role, and you seem to be covering quite a bit what I would want to ask you about anyway. So please just continue.
Okay. So so after Area 51, I asked Albert about some of the mysteries of life that the ancient mysteries that a lot of us is wondering about, like the Ark of the Covenant, the Bermuda Triangle, and the Loch Ness Monster. Just curiosity items that I've been thinking about for the longest time. Usually he doesn't allow me to freely ask questions, but in this case he said, okay, well, I'll ask it away and I'll try to explain it to you. So I said to him, the Ark of the Covenant, history, or a lot of historians or a lot of occult, believers think that the Ark of the Covenant contained the 10 commandments that Moses brought down from the mountain, which he says came from God. That this ark contained the 10 commandments, and it had special paranormal, supernatural powers. Anyone who's watched Indiana Jones and the Ark will know what I'm talking about, because their Nazi Germany thought that this ark had special powers. Well, Albert said it did contain the Ten Commandments, but didn't have any special powers, and that it has been hidden away. It's hidden away at a secret location in France. There's only a couple of people know where it is. He wouldn't tell me where it was, but he said it is still there, and it did in fact contain the original Ten Commandments. So then I asked him about the Bermuda Triangle, because a lot of people know that strange things happen when boats and aircraft fly over this particular area near in the Caribbean Sea near Bermuda. They call it the Bermuda Triangle, and people have been wondering sort of what gives there, what's happening. Well, he said that underneath this triangle, underneath the seabed, there is a UFO base, an ET base, basically. So one of the ET races has an underground base there, and so that when they come and go and use their warp drives, it often causes a disturbance in the atmosphere and the electromagnetism and so on. And this is what causes the problems with the planes and the boats and so on that sometimes disappear or lose communication for a number of hours. It's the ET craft coming and going from this underground base in the Bermuda Triangle. So that kind of explained that. So then I said to him, well, I've always been curious about the Loch Ness Monster, which is in a loch in inland sea, basically in northern Scotland. And there's been a lot of sightings, and people have said it looks like could be a dinosaur-like creature. They haven't been able to get definitive proof of it or get up close to it. Other people scoff and say it doesn't really exist. He said, "Oh yes, it does. It's actually descendant of a prehistoric dinosaur creature that used to roam in the oceans, and at one point the loch happened to open up to the ocean, and a few of these creatures took up residence in the loch, and then because of some geological disruptions, that passageway was closed off, so now they're stuck in the loch. But the loch's very long, it's very deep, and they've been around for a long time, and they are very real, and they're very good at getting away from human detection. They don't want to have humans find them, and so they are really real creatures. And he just said, don't worry about it. They've been around for a long time. They don't harm anyone, and now you know. So it was really quite interesting. So then one of the more interesting things that he did was he took me to, he had talked to me about parallel universes. I mentioned earlier in the interview that the universe is split randomly at random times. That's the way it was created. And so there's a number of parallel universes where planet Earth exists. But he said, because of, depending on how long ago they split, sometimes there's very significant differences between those parallel universes in terms of what's happening on that Earth versus our Earth. He said, for example, in one of the parallel universes, the Earth doesn't actually exist because of a cosmic quirk. It was never formed. And in another one, the asteroid that struck the Yucatan Peninsula 65 million years ago and killing most of the dinosaurs, in that particular Earth, the asteroid missed the planet by a whisker, and the dinosaurs are still the dominant species of that Earth. It's really quite interesting. But then he said that he would show me a Earth in a parallel universe that has sort of like is much closer to the Earth that we know. And so he took me to this Earth, and he knows how to sort of get through the interdimensional doorways, and so he took me to Earth. We ended up hovering above Los Angeles, and what I noticed was that there was basically no smog in the air. It was clear as a bell. And I looked down at the streets, and there was virtually no vehicles on the streets, which is really quite unusual, because if you've ever been to LA, you know how the freeways get jammed up and it's full of cars all the time. So I said to him, well, what's going on here? Is this the same time frame as our Earth? And he said, yes. He said, what happened was that particular Earth experienced a COVID pandemic like we did, but it happened a number of years earlier. And what they had noticed during the lockdowns for the pandemic was that there was much less pollution because people weren't driving to work or going anywhere or flying. So it was a lot less fossil fuels being burnt. The air was cleaner. Everything was just so much nicer during the lockdowns. And so when the pandemic was over, their scientists got together and said, why can't we find a way to make this sort of a permanent effect on our planet, to get rid of all this fossil fuel burning vehicles and planes and industries and everything else? Why can't we find a way? So the scientists at CERN in Switzerland, they worked at it for a long time, and finally they discovered a way to basically dematerialize a molecule of water and rematerialize it at another location. So it was basically, they discovered a basic form of teleportation. Again, anybody who's watched Star Trek knows that was a common feature of Star Trek, where Captain Kirk would say, "Beam me up, Scotty," and away they go. So after doing the molecule of water, they developed ways to do more complex materials, and eventually they figured out how to actually teleport living creatures. And so when I arrived at this parallel universe, they had it very well developed. So they could teleport not only people but goods, from city to city. So they didn't need to have people driving cars to get to work or to get to other cities. They didn't need semi-trucks on the road hauling freight or trains, and people didn't need to get on a plane to get from one city to another. So that's why the atmosphere was so clear, because everyone, if you wanted to go from LA to New York, all you did was step into one of these teleport booths and press in a few coordinates, and bang, you were off in New York. You didn't have to go on a plane. You didn't have to go through security checkpoints or wait at a gate or sit on a cramped airplane. It was just basically virtually instantaneous. So that's why there were so few vehicles, because these booths were like about every 2 or 3 blocks, and you could go within the city, you could go from city to city or around the world, whatever you wanted to do. So it was really quite amazing. And they had basically brought to fruition what Gene Roddenberry had basically predicted in his Star Trek books about the teleportation. And so that was quite amazing. And it was really a huge difference in terms of the pollution on their planet. And it was just so much easier for people to move around. And it's something that hopefully our scientists on Earth can eventually develop it the same way, so that we can have the same benefits from that. And of course, I asked Albert, well, why can't you or the scientists here, why can't you give us the formula, the way to develop this teleportation? And he said, no, can't do that. Prime Directive won't allow that. So the scientists on Earth are going to have to figure that out for themselves. But he says, if we work at it hard, maybe we'll get there eventually someday. So that was really quite interesting. Hopefully we can get there someday. So there's a number of different parallel universes. I saw one other one which is described in one of my earlier books. This one was really quite amazing. It was quite a success story in terms of technology, and so I just know that someday maybe I'll get to see a few more parallel universes. But when you speak of parallel universes, a lot of people have heard the term the Mandela effect, and that was coined by a researcher who was attending a psychic or paranormal conference in South Africa quite a while ago. And what this researcher found was that a significant number of the attendees at this conference vividly recalled media reports, on TV, newspapers, magazines, that Nelson Mandela had died in prison in the 1980s. Well, we all know, of course, that Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990 and went on to become the president of South Africa. So how do these people have these vivid memories? Albert said it was simple, that they saw a temporary opening between the dimensions, and what they viewed about Nelson Mandela was a look into another dimension, Earth in a parallel universe. And in that particular Earth, the events about Nelson Mandela that they recalled, where he died in prison, actually did happen. So they had a brief glimpse into this parallel universe. And then henceforth, they coined that term where people are seeing glimpses into another universe. They called that the Mandela effect, which is really quite interesting. And there's examples of it all over where people will say, God, I recall, this or that, which is very vividly, which isn't really what happened in our universe. And it's hard to explain, like, how do I remember that? Because it didn't really happen in our universe. They're having a glimpse into a parallel universe. Now, the thing that the other interesting thing that he mentioned was that if a person happens to be in a universe, when it divides into two, then it everything divides, and so the people, the animals, everything, excuse me, divides into two. So if you happen to be living in a universe when it split into two, all of a sudden now there's two of you. There's one of you in this universe, one in the other universe, and you won't be aware of that because it's not transparent. You won't be aware that the universe is split. You won't have any idea, but all of a sudden there will be basically two of you. And Albert said, so I said to him, so what happens to when the soul that's occupying me, what happens when it's split? And he says, well, the soul just splits off into two different people. And that can happen because souls can occupy more than one physical body at a time. And so he said, you won't know what happened until you go back to the spirit side when your body dies. And then eventually you'll be reunited with your twin clone, and you will go through your life reviews, but your lives won't be identical because of things that happen in each universe. So because of the interaction of energy and matter in the universe, in your universe versus that of the other universe, things will just turn out differently. And people have free will to make decisions and take actions. So what happens in my universe may not necessarily be the same as what happens in the universe that my clone exists in. So it's really quite interesting, but it just means that my soul will have a different perspective, have two perspectives instead of just one in terms of my life journey. And the interesting thing is that when you go back to the spirit side, you can look at what your clone did in his universe. And it's very interesting because, when you look back at your life, you may have realized that you've come to many major decision points. So you come to a fork in the road. It's like, should I take the left fork or the right fork? It may be about what job should I take? What city should I live in? What woman should I marry? All those major decisions that really impact the rest of your life. And you may have wondered, when you look back, what would have happened if I had made a different decision? But interestingly, when you look back, when you get back there, if you do have a clone, you may find out that your clone did make a different decision. And then you can see what happened because your clone made a different decision. So it's really quite interesting. It's quite fascinating. But I have no idea whether I have a clone or whether you do, Adnan. I guess we'll find out eventually. But it's really quite a unique sort of concept. So
Can you speak a little bit
universes
to,
are,
just real quick, when does that happen? Is it random times or is it a predetermined time?
no, it's random. The source created the universe, the first one, to divide at random times, and every universe since then does it at random times. So we have no idea when it's going to happen. I have no idea. Albert wouldn't say how many different Earths there are in parallel universes, and he didn't say whether I have a clone. He just refused to answer that. Said it's not something I need to know right now. But you may, it may happen. It may be that our universe did not split since I arrived on this planet, so maybe I don't. But it's just a fascinating idea, just very interesting to know that very small little things in people's behavior on one Earth can really make a significant difference in terms of what happens on a parallel universe and to another Earth. And for example, on one of my previous trips to a parallel Earth, one of the things I discovered was that he took me on a trip to New York City. We touched down in Harlem. One of the things I noticed was that there were hardly any Black people in Harlem, which seems strange because that's their major focal point in New York. And I said to Albert, why are there so few Black people here? And he said, well, it was a quirk in the history of that Earth. And what happened was in the early 15th century, England abolished all slavery. And then the other countries in Europe followed suit. And because of that, and because the European countries basically colonized North America, because of the abolished slavery, there was no slave trade. So slaves were captured in Africa and traveled to the Americas to live and work as slaves. And so in that particular earth, because of that, there was no Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln because there weren't any slaves. There was no Civil War. There was no Civil Rights Movement. It wasn't necessary. And that the number of Black people in that country were like less than 1% compared to about 13% in our particular earth. So very interesting. Just one little quirk in the history made a significant difference to America and to some of the other Caribbean islands where they used to have a lot of slaves brought over in the slave trade. So very, very interesting. And I really would love to see a lot more of our planet in parallel universes to see how they compare. But it's up to Albert. And if he wants to take me there, he will. But I really can't. I can't force the issue. But it's very interesting that I saw at least two of them with sort of major differences. So that's pretty much the. Oh, yeah. The one final thing in my book 5 that I should mention, which is really quite interesting. Do we have time yet? We have 6 minutes. Okay.
We're not limited on time. It's however long you'd like.
Okay. Well, I'll just tell you this one, and then we can we can wrap it up. So, in one of my trips, which I detail in my 5th book, Dancing with Angels in Heaven, is that I got to sit in on a conversation with what I call 3 wise men. They were the souls who were Jesus Christ, Muhammad, and Moses. And these 3 were having a chat with the Council of Wise Ones. And the Council of Wise Ones is the council that oversees all the incarnations on Earth. And basically the council, the chair of the council, Sophia, was saying, boy, things down on Earth aren't in great shape. We're at a really major turning point. We have so much violence, and we have weapons of mass destruction, and we don't know whether or not they're actually going to, your civilization on Earth is going to survive, but we want to kick it up a notch and help them out. And so she said they were looking for potentially having one of these master souls, and all 3 of them were master souls, very advanced souls, looking to see if maybe one of them would reincarnate on Earth as sort of a new Messiah to help humanity move up the spiritual ladder, help them get rid of their negative emotions, and allow our civilization to survive before we destroy ourselves. And so, interesting conversation with these 3 masters who all had played significant roles in their religions that they left behind after they left planet Earth. You know, Christianity and Judaism and Islam. So they had a chat. They all agreed that might be a good idea. They had a chat about should the new Messiah be a man or a woman. They all thought it would be appropriate to have a woman, but they said that if a woman was incarnated in a wrong country, they wouldn't get the respect and they wouldn't be listened to as well as a man. So they debated that one. And then it was a question of, well, which country should it be? So they kicked this all around, and at the end, they decided they had to work on it. They agreed that this should be done. And when Sophia asked them who would volunteer to do this, and they all put up their hands, so they're all willing to do this. And when they left this conversation, and I wasn't allowed to follow them, they went ahead to sort of plan out how this would be and when it would happen. I have no idea when it's going to happen or who it's going to be, but it's very interesting to think that, gosh, maybe help is on the way. So it's very encouraging.
So is this in correlation with what, especially if the Christian religion talks about the second coming?
Well, yeah, sort of. But it wasn't just related just to the Christian religion. I mean, it was meant to be someone who, it could have been any of them. It could have been Moses, could have been Muhammad, could have been Jesus, who came back to try to rescue humanity, to try to help us get out of this tough spot. And so, yeah, Christians refer to the second coming. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the other religions, whether they predict that or not. But in any event, there was a clear discussion among the 3 that one of them should come and reincarnate. Who knows when it will happen or where it will be. They also decided that they wouldn't necessarily have to be incarnated into a baby, and have the baby grow up and then, like the other people did. And so they agreed that maybe what they would do is come as a walk-in soul. And walk-in souls, as you know, Adnan, it's where a soul has been with somebody from birth, and they maybe hit, midlife, and they decide that they've had enough of it, and they want to end the incarnation. And then another soul who wants to take over the body will basically move in, take over that human body as a walk-in soul. So there's an exchange of souls. And so they decided that that would be maybe an appropriate way, so that they wouldn't have to go through all the trials and tribulations of being a baby and a toddler and a young child and a young adult. They could just walk into somebody whose soul wanted to leave and just take over the body. So that's one of the things they were thinking about. And so who knows when it will happen or if it will happen. I know they were keen to do it. Hopefully it'll happen in our lifetime, but there's no linear time over there. So for them, if they wait 500 years, it's no big deal, but so hopefully it'll happen sooner rather than later. But very encouraging to know that at least one of these master souls will probably reincarnate as a walk-in soul and try to help us.
Well, Garnet, thank you very much. I appreciate you being on today, and of course, making my job a lot easier. So
I'm sorry I
I'm
talk
gonna.
so much, Adnan.
No, that's actually great. No, because most of the time I have to kind of try to figure out what subjects would be best to cover that's related to the book, but you just have it all on top of your head, and this helped out a lot better. Plus, I don't like to interrupt, as you know, whenever I do interviews anyway.
Yes.
So what I'm going to have is the links in the description below this video once it's edited, and so that everyone can have an opportunity to check out all the books that you have available, because it seems like there's a lot of information there, and it's probably best to just get the book, take the time to go through whatever they need to go through. So
Yeah, I would recommend Adnan for somebody who's not familiar with my books to start with the first one and then move up chronologically to the last one. That's the way to get the best picture. And of course, all my books are published by Ozark Mountain Publishing, so they can be bought on the Ozark Mountain Publishing site, plus all the other online stores like Amazon and Barnes and Noble and everything else. It's easy to find them. For information about my books, they can go to my website, which is garnetschulhauser.com. And there are buy links to get you right to where you can buy the book. And there's also all my social media site links are there. And all of my interviews and radio shows are on my website, so people can listen to all my other interviews and radio shows, and they can go to my YouTube channel where there's a number of videos. So great source of information. And if anybody has a comment or a question, I invite them to send me an email, and I'll do my best to respond.
all right, well, good deal. Well, Garnet, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here today, and I'm pretty sure we'll see each other again, and we'll stay in touch.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Adnan, and have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.